6:12 Wednesday morning. Let's get to a midweek big take.
The Big Take on Kayal and Company.
All right, the big take this morning. The heat is on for Trump in Miami. Yesterday was a historical day for the United States of America. Sure, the spotlight was on Donald Trump's arraignment. And yes, Republicans are treated differently than Democrats. But the reality is that this is about more than a politician or a political party. The bigger picture here is the Department of Justice. They are an institution where law and politics intersect. And when the politics outweigh the rule of law, as well as the traditional approach of presidents and classified documents, and that gets disrupted, especially those who are the front runner of a party seeking re-election, then America becomes no different and no better than nations around the globe that conduct political weaponization against their chief rivals. Citizens of third world countries, call them banana republics, call them police states, they flee these countries to get away from this sort of political prosecution and persecution. That is the historic and sad aspect of yesterday. If you watch the TV coverage of Trump showing up at the Miami Federal Courthouse yesterday, you probably observed many things. A very strong display of support for the 45th president of the United States. I'd venture to say a few hundred people showed up waving Trump flags as well as the United States of America flag. You saw white people, Hispanic people, and African-American people packed around the sidewalks to offer their displeasure towards this process. And it wasn't mostly peaceful. It was completely peaceful. But was this a rallying moment for Republicans? If you ask presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, it should be. The Republican presidential candidate who has no shot at winning and who never turns down a chance to be seen or heard, had this to say to every single GOP presidential candidate yesterday as he showed up to rally for Trump. Listen.
That brings me to my second announcement that I'm going to make today. This is an announcement of a letter that my campaign has sent to every other campaign in this race, to Mike Pence, to Nikki Haley, to Larry Elder, to RFK Jr., to Marianne Williamson, to Doug Burgum, to Perry Johnson, to Chris Christie, to Ron DeSantis, the governor of the state where we are today, who by any measure is not here today in his own state. I will tell you that we have sent this letter, and I'm happy to announce, this is my commitment on January 20th, 2025, if I'm elected the next U.S. president, to pardon Donald J. Trump for these offenses in this federal case. And I have challenged, I have demanded that every other candidate in this race either sign this commitment to pardon on January 20th, 2025, or else to explain why they are not.
I'll tell you what, he's probably campaigning for a spot in the Trump cabinet, but I'll say this, he's incredibly dedicated, well-spoken, and has good visions for America, but he'll be sitting on his couch on January 20th, 2025. During the arraignment, CNN got their pound of flesh as they continued to display a graphic on their network that read, "Trump now under arrest." Here are some of the details of the legal proceeding and how it sounded on CNN with Anderson Cooper and former U.S. Attorney Marcos Jimenez. Take a listen.
Well, now that he's been processed by the probation office, he is now heading up to the 13th floor. It's to the largest courtroom that we have in the courthouse. And he's going to have, despite the craziness out here and the gravity of the case, he's going to have a very basic, perfunctory initial appearance and arraignment. And I'm sure it's been talked about a lot, but the conditions of his release will be set. He'll plead not guilty, and then he'll go home. And after that, he'll be assigned a probation officer, and he will have to deal with that probation officer and whatever conditions of release are set by the judge.
I play you that audio and video to show you why CNN is no longer respected and how they continue to be a Trump-bashing network. Graphic display of Trump under arrest. Not Trump indictment, not Trump arraigned, but they go Trump under arrest. They do that for effect to elicit the emotions of their simpleton audience. And then listening to Jimenez talking about Trump being assigned a probation officer as if he got busted for a low-level drug offense in a county court. It's all done by design, and that's why CNN is done, and they've had to be down the road of, let's hire Charles Barkley. But let's get to Tucker and Trump. Tucker on Twitter 3 episode dropped last night, right around 6:30, about 2 hours prior to Donald Trump speaking, around 8:45. And Tucker Carlson says this was inevitable and always the plan. Take a listen.
But they weren't shocked. They knew this was coming. Everyone who's paid attention knew it was. What just happened was always going to happen. It's been inevitable since February 16th, 2016. That's the day Donald Trump made a blood enemy of the largest and most powerful organization in human history, which would be the federal government. Despite what you may remember, it wasn't anything that Trump had said about immigration or trade with China or rapists from Mexico. Those are the stories that dominated the headlines that year. Trump's a racist, they screamed. Stop him. But inside Washington, that was just noise. None of it really rated. Identity politics doesn't mean much to permanent Washington. What matters, then and now, is foreign policy. The invasions and occupations and proxy wars. The decisions that determine which global populations will thrive and which will die. The policies that come with trillion-dollar price tags. The ones that, over time, have made the counties around D.C. the richest suburbs in the world.
I think that's an incredibly great point by Tucker Carlson. And you've heard Dawn say it many times. Under Donald Trump, peace and prosperity. They don't have a problem with prosperity in Washington, D.C. They have a problem with peace. Because if there's peace, there's no conflict. And if there's no conflict, there's no war. And war is big business. And they don't like that about Trump. They never have, and they never will. Speaking of Trump, after flying from Miami back to New Jersey, he had the following to say from Bedminster. Listen.
The Espionage Act has been used to go after traitors and spies. It has nothing to do with a former president legally keeping his own documents. As president, the law that applies to this case is not the Espionage Act, but very simply the Presidential Records Act, which is not even mentioned in this ridiculous 44-page indictment. Under the Presidential Records Act, which is civil, not criminal, I had every right to have these documents. The crucial legal precedent is laid out in the most important case ever on this subject, known as the Clinton Socks case.
One thing that I absolutely love, and Trump's supporters should absolutely love, is the fact that the prosecution must prove every single element of this crime. That's because each and every codified crime has elements to it. The prosecution must prove each element for the crime to stick and to get a conviction. Take a listen to the legal expert on the 5, Judge Janine Pirro.
We had this narrative. We found out how many top secret, confidential, et cetera, and yet there is no indication that there was any harm. Harm is an essential element to the crime of espionage. I want to say that again. Harm is an essential element to the crime of espionage. Otherwise, you're dealing with the Presidential Records Act, which was created in '78 because Johnson and the rest of them couldn't figure out what was a presidential record and what wasn't.
So I ask you this, who was harmed and how? When Trump is there waving that page around, look at this, I've got this document, who was harmed and how? The answer is nobody. Good luck proving that in front of a Trump-appointed judge and a jury that will likely have at least one, if not multiple, pro-Trump supporters. Now, one thing that worries me for Trump is the current state of his legal team, as in he really doesn't have one. Here is an excerpt from Mediaite.com that says Donald Trump, who was arraigned on 37 federal counts related to the mishandling and retention of classified documents on Tuesday, and did so without hiring new lawyers as he planned. Last week, the former president announced he would bring in new legal representation after his previous lawyers, Jim Trusty and John Rowley, resigned from the job. Ahead of Trump being booked, The Guardian reported that Trump will be going in with the lawyers he still has without any of the additions he was looking for. Quote, Trump and his legal team spent the afternoon before his arraignment interviewing potential lawyers, but the interviews did not result in anyone joining the team, in time for Trump's initial court appearance. That according to the report. Quote, Trump has also seemingly been unable to find a specialist national security lawyer eligible to possess a security clearance to help him navigate the Espionage Act charges, end quote. Yesterday, the great Rich Zeoli tweeted, quote, the OJing of Trump's motorcade, end quote. Shades of O.J. Simpson going into the court as Trump's entrance had a similar sight and feel. But 28 years later, the difference is O.J. had a dream team, the best defense money could buy. Trump right now has all the money in the world, and it appears he is struggling to find the best legal experts that he can buy. But the prosecution has plenty of issues on their end as well, and one basic issue being timing. How in the world is the DOJ going to be able to get this trial underway in the next 6 to 8 months as the 2024 calendar will have arrived and it is election season? Trump's legal team will likely file motion after motion to slow down the already painfully slow process. But two things are for sure. Yesterday, we saw the following that Trump still garners, and the media, as well as the left, well, they didn't get what they had hoped for. MAGA extremists recreating January 6th. Nope, none of that happened. Poor media, poor lefties, and that's the big take.
The Big Take on Kayal and Company.